Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable persistence of medieval mysteries. Stories once dismissed as legend, conspiracy, or drunken monk exaggeration, now unraveling under the cold, quiet gaze of modern science. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together about myths of Babylonia and Assyria. Chapter I: The Races and Early Civilization of Babylonia. Before the dawn of the historical period, ancient Babylonia was divided into a number of independent city-states similar to those which existed in pre-dynastic Egypt. Ultimately, these were grouped into loose confederacies. The northern cities were embraced in the territory known as Akkad, and the southern in the land of Sumer or Shuma. This division had a racial as well as a geographical significance. The Akkadians were late-comers who had achieved political ascendancy in the north when the area they occupied was called Uri or Kiuri, and Sumer was known as Kengi. They were a people of Semitic speech with pronounced Semitic affinities. From the earliest times, the sculptors depicted them with abundant locks, long full beards, and the prominent distinctive noses and full lips, which we usually associate with the characteristic Jewish type, and also attired in long, flounced robes, suspended from their left shoulders and reaching down to their ankles. In contrast, the Sumerians had clean-shaven faces and scalps, and noses of Egyptian and Grecian rather than Semitic type, while they wore short, pleated kilts, and went about with the upper part of their bodies quite bare, like the Egyptian noblemen of the Old Kingdom period. They spoke a non-Semitic language, and were the oldest inhabitants of Babylonia of whom we have any knowledge. Sumerian civilization was rooted in the agricultural mode of life, and appears to have been well developed before the Semites became numerous and influential in the land. Cities had been built chiefly of sun-dried and fire-baked bricks. Distinctive pottery was manufactured with much skill. The people were governed by humanitarian laws, which formed the nucleus of the Hammurabi Code, and had in use a system of cuneiform writing, which was still in process of development from earlier pictorial characters. The distinctive feature of their agricultural methods was the engineering skill, which was displayed in extending the cultivatable area by the construction of irrigating canals and ditches. There are also indications that they possessed some knowledge of navigation and traded on the Persian Gulf. According to one of their own traditions, Eridu, originally a seaport, was their racial cradle. The Semitic Akkadians adopted the distinctive culture of these Sumerians after settlement, and exercised an influence on its subsequent growth. Much controversy has been waged regarding the original home of the Sumerians and the particular racial type which they represented. One theory connects them with the lank-haired and beardless Mongolians, and it is asserted on the evidence afforded by early sculptural reliefs that they were similarly oblique-eyed. As they also spoke an agglutinative language, it is suggested that they were descended from the same parent stock as the Chinese in an ancient Parthian homeland. If, however, the oblique eye was not the result of faulty and primitive art, it is evident that the Mongolian type, which is invariably found to be remarkably persistent in racial blends, did not survive in the Tigris and Euphrates valleys. For in the finer and more exact sculpture work of the later Sumerian period, the eyes of the ruling classes are found to be similar to those of the ancient Egyptians and Southern Europeans. Other facial characteristics suggest that a Mongolian racial connection is highly improbable. The prominent Sumerian nose, for instance, is quite unlike the Chinese, which is diminutive. Nor can far-reaching conclusions be drawn from the scanty linguistic evidence at our disposal. Although the languages of the Sumerians and long-headed Chinese are of the agglutinative variety, so are those also which are spoken by the broad-headed Turks and Magyars of Hungary, the broad-headed and long-headed, dark and fair Finns, and the brunette and short-statured Basques with pear-shaped faces, who are regarded as a variation of the Mediterranean race, with distinctive characteristics developed in isolation. Languages afford no sure indication of racial origins or affinities. Another theory connects the Sumerians with the broad-headed peoples of the Western Asian plains and plateaus, who are vaguely grouped as Ural-Altaic stock and are represented by the present-day Turks and the dark variety of Finns. It is assumed that they migrated southward in remote times in consequence of tribal pressure caused by changing climatic conditions and abandoned a purely pastoral for an agricultural life. The late Sumerian sculpture work again presents difficulties in this connection, for the faces and bulging occiputs suggest rather a long-headed than a broad-headed type, and the theory no longer obtains that new habits of life alter skull forms which are usually associated with other distinctive traits in the structure of skeletons. These broad-headed nomadic peoples of the steppes are allied to Tartar stock and distinguished from the pure Mongols by their abundance of wavy hair and beard. The fact that the Sumerians shaved their scalps and faces is highly suggestive in this connection. From the earliest times, it has been the habit of most peoples to emphasize their racial characteristics so as to be able, one may suggest, to distinguish readily a friend from a foeman. At any rate, this fact is generally recognized by ethnologists. The Basques, for instance, shave their pointed chins and sometimes grow short side whiskers to increase the distinctive pear shape which is given to their faces by their prominent temples. In contrast, their neighbors, the Andalusians, grow chin whiskers to broaden their already rounded chins and to distinguish them markedly from the Basques. Another example of similar character is afforded in Asia Minor, where the skulls of the children of long-headed Kurds are narrowed, and those of the children of broad-headed Armenians made flatter behind as a result of systematic pressure applied by using cradle boards. In this way, these rival peoples accentuate their contrasting head forms, which at times may, no doubt, show a tendency towards variation as a result of the crossment of types. When it is found, therefore, that the Sumerians, like the ancient Egyptians, were in the habit of shaving, their ethnic affinities should be looked for among a naturally glabrous, rather than a heavily bearded people. The Central Asiatic source for Sumerian culture has also been urged of late, with much circumstantial detail. It breaks quite fresh and interesting ground. Recent scientific expeditions in Russian and Chinese Turkestan have accumulated important archaeological data, which clearly establish that vast areas of desert country were at a remote period most verdurous and fruitful, and thickly populated by organized and apparently progressive communities. From these ancient centers of civilization, wholesale migrations must have been impelled from time to time in consequence of the gradual encroachment of wind-distributed sand and the increasing shortage of water. At Anau in Russian Turkestan, where excavations were conducted by the Pumpelly expedition, abundant traces were found of an archaic and forgotten civilization reaching back to the late Stone Age. The pottery is decorated with geometric designs and resembles somewhat other Neolithic specimens found as far apart as Susa, the capital of ancient Elam on the borders of Babylonia, Boghaz-Köri in Asia Minor, the seat of Hittite administration, round the Black Sea to the north, and at points in the southern regions of the Balkan Peninsula. It is suggested that these various finds are scattered evidences of early racial drifts from the Central Asian areas, which were gradually being rendered uninhabitable. Among the Copper Age artifacts at Anau are clay votive statuettes resembling those which were used in Sumeria for religious purposes. These, however, cannot be held to prove a racial connection, but they are important insofar as they afford evidence of early trade relations in a hitherto unsuspected direction, and the long distances over which cultural influence extended before the dawn of history. Further we cannot go. No inscriptions have yet been discovered to render articulate this mysterious Central Asian civilization, or to suggest the original source of early Sumerian picture writing. Nor is it possible to confirm Mr. Pumpelly's view that from the Anau district, the Sumerians and Egyptians first obtained barley and wheat, and some of their domesticated animals. If, as Professor Elliot Smith believes, copper was first used by the ancient Egyptians, it may be, on the other hand, that a knowledge of this metal reached Anau through Sumeria, and that the elements of the earlier culture were derived from the same quarter by an indirect route. The evidence obtainable in Egypt is of interest in this connection. Large quantities of food have been taken from the stomachs and intestines of sun-dried bodies which have lain in their predynastic grave for over 60 centuries. This material has been carefully examined and has yielded, among other things, husks of barley and millet, and fragments of mammalian bones, including those, no doubt, of the domesticated sheep and goats and cattle painted on the pottery. It is therefore apparent that at an extremely remote period a knowledge of agriculture extended throughout Egypt, and we have no reason for supposing that it was not shared by the contemporary inhabitants of Sumer. The various theories which have been propounded regarding the outside source of Sumerian culture are based on the assumption that it commenced abruptly and full-grown. Its rude beginnings cannot be traced on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, but although no specimens of the earliest form of picture writing have been recovered from the ruins of Sumerian and Akkadian cities, neither have any been found elsewhere. The possibility remains, therefore, that early Babylonian culture was indigenous. A great deal of ingenuity has been displayed by many scholars, says Professor Elliot Smith, with the object of bringing these Sumerians from somewhere else as immigrants into Sumer, but no reasons have been advanced to show that they had not been settled at the head of the Persian Gulf for long generations before they first appeared on the stage of history. The argument that no early remains have been found is futile, not only because such a country as Sumer is no more favorable to the preservation of such evidence than is the delta of the Nile, but also upon the more general grounds that negative statements of this sort cannot be assigned a positive evidence for an immigration. This distinguished ethnologist is frankly of opinion that the Sumerians were the congeners of the pre-dynastic Egyptians of the Mediterranean or brown race, the eastern branch of which reaches to India and the western to the British Isles and Ireland. In the same ancient family are included the Arabs, whose physical characteristics distinguish them from the Semites of Jewish type. Some light may be thrown on the Sumerian problem by giving consideration to the present-day racial complexion of Western Asia. The importance of evidence of this character has been emphasized elsewhere. In Egypt, for instance, Dr. C.S. Myers has ascertained that the modern peasants have skull forms which are identical with those of their predynastic ancestors. Mr. Hawes has also demonstrated that the ancient inhabitants of Crete are still represented on that famous island. But even more remarkable is the fact that the distinctive racial type, which occupied the Paleolithic caves of the Dordogne Valley in France, continues to survive in their vicinity after an interval of over 20,000 years. It is noteworthy, therefore, to find that in southwestern Asia, at the present day, one particular racial type predominates over all others. Professor Ripley, who summarizes a considerable mass of data in this connection, refers to it as the Iranian and says, it includes the Persians and Kurds, possibly the Ossets in the Caucasus, and farther to the east, a large number of Asiatic tribes, from the Afghans to the Hindus. These peoples are all primarily long-headed and dark brunettes. They incline to slenderness of habit, although varying in stature according to circumstances. In them we recognize at once undoubted congeners of our Mediterranean race in Europe. The area of their extension runs off into Africa through the Egyptians, who are clearly of the same race. Not only the modern peoples, but the ancient Egyptians and the Phoenicians also have been traced to the same source. By far the largest portion of this part of Western Asia is inhabited by this eastern branch of the Mediterranean race. The broad-headed type occurs sporadically among a few ethnic remnants in Syria and Mesopotamia. The exhaustive study of thousands of ancient crania in London and Cambridge collections has shown that Mediterranean peoples, having alien traits, the result of early admixture, were distributed between Egypt and the Punjab. Where blending took place, the early type, apparently, continued to predominate. And it appears to be reasserting itself in our own time in Western Asia as elsewhere. It seems doubtful, therefore, that the ancient Sumerians differed racially from the predynastic inhabitants of Egypt and the Pelasgians and Iberians of Europe. Indeed, the statuettes from Tello, the site of the Sumerian city of Lagash, display distinctively Mediterranean skull forms and faces. Some of the plump figures of the later period suggest, however, the particular alien strain, which in Egypt and elsewhere is always associated with a tendency to the development of fat, in contrast to the lean and sinewy appearance of most representatives of the brown race. This change may be accounted for by the presence of the Semites in northern Babylonia. Whence then came these invading Semitic Akkadians of Jewish type? It is generally agreed that they were closely associated with one of the early outpourings of nomadic peoples from Arabia, a country which is favorable for the production of a larger population than it is able to maintain permanently, especially when its natural resources are restricted by a succession of abnormally dry years. In tracing the Akkadians from Arabia, however, we are confronted at the outset with the difficulty that its prehistoric, and many of its present-day, inhabitants are not of the characteristic Semitic type. On the ancient Egyptian pottery and monuments, the Arabs are depicted as men who closely resembled the representatives of the Mediterranean race in the Nile Valley and elsewhere. They shaved neither scalps nor faces, as did the historic Sumerians and Egyptians, but grew the slight moustache and chin-tuft beard like the Libyans on the north, and the majority of the men whose bodies have been preserved in pre-dynastic grave in the Nile Valley. If, writes Professor Elliot Smith, the generally accepted view is true, that Arabia was the original home of the Semites, the Arab must have undergone a profound change in his physical characters after he left his homeland and before he reached Babylonia. This authority is of opinion that the Arabians first migrated into Palestine and northern Syria, where they mingled with the southward migrating Armenoid peoples from Asia Minor. This blend of Arabs, kinsmen of the Proto-Egyptians and Armenoids, would then form the big-nosed, long-bearded Semites, so familiar not only on the ancient Babylonian and Egyptian monuments, but also in the modern Jews. Such a view is in accord with Dr. Hugo Winkler's contention that the flow of Arabian migrations was northwards towards Syria, ere it swept through Mesopotamia. It can scarcely be supposed that these invasions of settled districts did not result in the fusion and crossment of racial types and the production of a subvariety with medium skull form and marked facial characteristics. Of special interest in this connection is the evidence afforded by Palestine and Egypt. The former country has ever been subject to periodic ethnic disturbances and changes. Its racial history has a remote beginning in the Pleistocene age. Paleolithic flints of Chellean and other primitive types have been found in large numbers, and a valuable collection of these is being preserved in a French museum at Jerusalem. In a northern cave, fragments of rude pottery belonging to an early period in the late Stone Age have been discovered in association with the bones of the woolly rhinoceros. To a later period belong the series of Jezza cave dwellings, which, according to Professor McAllister, the well-known Palestinian authority, were occupied by a non-Semitic people of low stature, with thick skulls and showing evidence of the great muscular strength that is essential to savage life. These people are generally supposed to be representatives of the Mediterranean race, which Sergi has found to have been widely distributed throughout Syria and a part of Asia Minor. An interesting problem, however, is raised by the fact that, in one of the caves, there are evidences that the dead were cremated. This was not a Mediterranean custom, nor does it appear to have prevailed outside the Jezza area. If, however, it does not indicate that the kinsmen of the ancient Egyptians came into contact with the remnants of an earlier people, it may be that the dead of a later people were burned there. The possibility that unidentified types may have contributed to the Semitic blend, however, remains. The Mediterraneans mingled in northern Syria and Asia Minor with the broad-headed Armenoid peoples who are represented in Europe by the Alpine race. With them, they ultimately formed the Great Hittite Confederacy. These Armenoids were moving southwards at the very dawn of Egyptian history, and nothing is known of their conquests and settlements. Their pioneers, who were probably traders, appear to have begun to enter the Delta region before the close of the late Stone Age. The earliest outpourings of migrating Arabians may have been in progress about the same time. This early southward drift of Armenoids might account for the presence in southern Palestine, early in the Copper Age, of the tall race referred to in the Bible as the Rephaim or Anakim, whose power was broken only by the Hebrew invaders. Joshua drove them out of Hebron, in the neighborhood of which Abraham had purchased a burial cave from Ephron, the Hittite. Apparently, a system of land laws prevailed in Palestine, at this early period. It is of special interest for us to note that in Abraham's day and afterwards, the landed proprietors in the country of the Rephaim were identified with the aliens from Asia Minor, the tall variety, in the Hittite Confederacy. Little doubt need remain that the Arabians during their sojourn in Palestine and Syria met with distinctive types, and if not with pure Armenoids, at any rate with peoples having Armenoid traits. The consequent multiplication of tribes and the gradual pressure exercised by the constant stream of immigrants from Arabia and Asia Minor must have kept this part of Western Asia in a constant state of unrest. Fresh migrations of the surplus stock were evidently propelled towards Egypt in one direction, and the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates in another. The Semites of Akkad were probably the conquerors of the more highly civilized Sumerians, who must have previously occupied that area. It is possible that they owed their success to the possession of superior weapons. Professor Elliot Smith suggests in this connection that the Arabians had become familiar with the use of copper as a result of contact with the Egyptians in Sinai. There is no evidence, however, that the Sumerians were attacked before they had begun to make metal weapons. It is more probable that the invading nomads had superior military organization and considerable experience in waging war against detached tribal units. They may have also found some of the northern Sumerian city-states at war with one another and taken advantage of their unpreparedness to resist a common enemy. The rough Dorians who overran Greece and the fierce Goths who shattered the power of Rome were similarly in a lower state of civilization than the peoples whom they subdued. The Sumerians, however, ultimately achieved an intellectual conquest of their conquerors. Although the leaders of invasion may have formed military aristocracies in the cities which they occupied, it was necessary for the great majority of the nomads to engage their activities in new directions after settlement. The Semitic Akkadians, therefore, adopted Sumerian habits of life, which were best suited for the needs of the country, and they consequently came under the spell of Sumerian modes of thought. This is shown by the fact that the native speech of ancient Sumer continued long after the dawn of history to be the language of Babylonian religion and culture, like Latin in Europe during the Middle Ages. For centuries, the mingling peoples must have been bilingual, as are many of the inhabitants of Ireland, Wales, and the Scottish Highlands in the present age, but ultimately the language of the Semites became the prevailing speech in Sumer and Akkad. This change was the direct result of the conquests and the political supremacy achieved by the northern people. A considerable period elapsed, however, ere this consummation was reached, and ancient Babylonia became completely Semitized. No doubt its brilliant historical civilization owed much of its vigor and stability to the organizing genius of the Semites, but the basis on which it was established had been laid by the ingenious and imaginative Sumerians, who first made the desert to blossom like the rose. The culture of Sumer was a product of the late Stone Age, which should not be regarded as necessarily an age of barbarism. During its vast periods, there were great discoveries and great inventions in various parts of Asia, Africa, and Europe. The Neoliths made pottery and bricks. We know that they invented the art of spinning, for spindle whorls are found even in the Jezza caves to which we have referred, while in Egypt the pre-dynastic dead were sometimes wrapped in finely woven linen. Their deftly chipped flint implements are eloquent of artistic and mechanical skill, and undoubted mathematical ability, must be credited to the makers of smoothly polished stone hammers, which are so perfectly balanced that they revolve on a center of gravity. In Egypt and Babylonia, the soil was tilled, and its fertility increased by irrigation. Wherever man waged a struggle with nature, he made rapid progress, and consequently we find that the earliest great civilizations were rooted in the little fields of the Neolithic farmers. Their mode of life necessitated a knowledge of nature's laws. They had to take note of the seasons and measure time. So Egypt gave us the calendar, and Babylonia the system of dividing the week into 7 days, and the day into 12 double hours. The agricultural life permitted large communities to live in river valleys, and these had to be governed by codes of laws. Settled communities required peace and order for their progress and prosperity. All great civilizations have evolved from the habits and experiences of settled communities. Law and religion were closely associated, and the evidence afforded by the remains of stone circles and temples suggests that in the organization and division of labor, the influence of religious teachers was preeminent. Early rulers, indeed, were priest-kings of the deity who owned the land and measured out the span of human life. We need not assume that Neolithic man led an idyllic existence. His triumphs were achieved by slow and gradual steps. His legal codes were, no doubt, written in blood, and his institutions welded in the fires of adversity. But disciplined by laws, which fostered humanitarian ideals, Neolithic man, especially of the Mediterranean race, had reached a comparatively high state of civilization long ages before the earliest traces of his activities can be obtained. When this type of mankind is portrayed in ancient Sumeria, ancient Egypt, and ancient Crete, we find that the faces are refined and intellectual and often quite modern in aspect. The skulls show that in the late Stone Age, the human brain was fully developed and that the racial types were fixed. In every country in Europe, we still find the direct descendants of the ancient Mediterranean race, as well as the descendants of the less highly cultured conquerors who swept westward out of Asia at the dawn of the Bronze Age. And everywhere there are evidences of crossment of types in varying degrees. Even the influence of Neolithic intellectual life still remains. The comparative study of mythology and folk beliefs reveals that we have inherited certain modes of thought from our remote ancestors, who were the congeners of the ancient Sumerians and the ancient Egyptians. In this connection, it is of interest, therefore, to refer to the social ideals of the early peoples who met and mingled on the southern plains of the Tigris and Euphrates, and especially the position occupied by women, which is engaging so much attention at the present day. It would appear that among the Semites and other nomadic peoples, woman was regarded as the helpmate rather than the companion and equal of man. The birth of a son was hailed with joy. It was miserable to have a daughter, as a Hindu sage reflected. In various countries, it was the custom to expose female children after birth and leave them to die. A wife had no rights other than those accorded to her by her husband, who exercised over her the power of life and death. Sons inherited family possessions. The daughters had no share allotted to them and could be sold by fathers and brothers. Among the peoples who observed male right, social life was reflected in the conception of controlling male deities, accompanied by shadowy goddesses who were often little else than figures of speech. The ancient Sumerians, on the other hand, like the Mediterranean peoples of Egypt and Crete, reverenced and exalted motherhood in social and religious life. Women were accorded a legal status, and marriage laws were promulgated by the state. Wives could possess private property in their own right, as did the Babylonian Sarah, wife of Abraham, who owned the Egyptian slave Hagar. A woman received from her parents a marriage dowry, and in the event of separation from her husband, she could claim its full value. Some spinsters, or wives, were accustomed to enter into business partnerships with men or members of their own sex, and could sue and be sued in courts of law. Brothers and sisters were joint heirs of the family estate. Daughters might possess property over which their fathers exercised no control. They could also enter into legal agreements with their parents in business matters when they had attained to years of discretion. Young women who took vows of celibacy and lived in religious institutions could yet make business investments, as surviving records show. There is only one instance of a Sumerian woman ascending the throne, like Queen Hatshepsut of Egypt. Women therefore were not rigidly excluded from official life. Dungi-II, an early Sumerian king, appointed 2 of his daughters as rulers of conquered cities in Syria and Elam. Similarly, Shishak, the Egyptian pharaoh, handed over the city of Jezza, which he had subdued, to his daughter, Solomon's wife. In the religious life of ancient Sumeria, the female population exercised an undoubted influence, and in certain temples there were priestesses. The oldest hymns give indication of the respect shown to women by making reference to mixed assemblies as females and males, just as present-day orators address themselves to ladies and gentlemen. In the later Semitic adaptations of these productions, it is significant to note this conventional reference was altered to male and female. If influences, however, were at work to restrict the position of women, they did not meet with much success, because when Hammurabi codified existing laws, the ancient rights of women received marked recognition. There were 2 dialects in ancient Sumeria, and the invocatory hymns were composed in what was known as the women's language. It must not be inferred, however, that the ladies of Sumeria had established a speech which differed from that used by men. The reference would appear to be to a softer and homelier dialect, perhaps the oldest of the 2, in which poetic emotion found fullest and most beautiful expression. In these ancient days, as in our own, the ideal of womanhood was the poet's chief source of inspiration, and among the hymns, the highest reach of poetic art was attained in the invocation of Ishtar, the Babylonian Venus. The following hymn is addressed to that deity in her Valkyrie-like character as a goddess of war, but her more feminine traits are not obscured. Hymn to Ishtar. To thee I cry, O Lady of the Gods, Lady of Ladies, Goddess without peer, Ishtar, who shapes the lives of all mankind. Thou stately world queen, sovereign of the sky, and lady ruler of the host of heaven. Illustrious is thy name, O light divine, gleaming in lofty splendor o'er the earth. Heroic daughter of the moon, O hear. Thou dost control our weapons and in battles fierce, the victory at will. Crowned majestic fate, Ishtar most high, who art exalted over all the gods. Thou bringest lamentation, thou dost urge, with hostile hearts, our brethren to the fray. The gift of strength is thine, for thou art strong. Thy will is urgent, brooking no delay. Thy hand is violent, thou queen of war, girded with battle and enrobed with fear. Thou sovereign wielder of the wand of doom, the heavens and earth are under thy control. Adored art thou in every sacred place, in temples, holy dwellings, and in shrines. Where is thy name not lauded, where thy will unheeded, and thine images not made? Where are thy temples not upreared, O where art thou not mighty, peerless, and supreme? Anu and Bel and E have thee raised to rank supreme in majesty and power. They have established thee above the gods, and all the host of heaven, O stately queen. At thought of thee, the world is filled with fear. The gods in heaven quake, and on the earth all spirits pause, and all mankind bow down with reverence for thy name, O Lady Judge. Thy ways are just and holy, thou dost gaze on sinners with compassion, and each morn leadest the wayward to the rightful path. Now linger not, but come, O Goddess fair. O Shepherdess of all, thou drawest nigh. With feet unwearied, thou dost break the bonds of these thy handmaids, when thou stoopest o'er the dying with compassion, lo, they live. And when the sick behold thee, they are healed. Hear me, thy servant, hearken to my prayer. For I am full of sorrow, and I sigh. In sore distress, weeping on thee I wait. Be merciful, my lady, pity take, and answer, 'tis enough, and be appeased. How long must my heart sorrow, and make moan, and restless be? How long must my dark home be filled with mourning, and my soul with grief? O Lioness of heaven, bring me peace, and rest and comfort, hearken to my prayer. Is anger pity? May thine eyes look down with tenderness and blessings, and behold thy servant. O have mercy, hear my cry, and unbewitch me from the evil spells, that I may see thy glory. O how long shall these my foes pursue me, working ill, and robbing me of joy? O how long shall demons compass me about, and cause affliction without end? I thee adore. The gift of strength is thine, and thou art strong. The weakly are made strong, yet I am weak. O hear me, I am glutted with my grief, this flood of grief, by evil winds distressed. My heart hath fled me like a bird on wings, and like the dove I moan. Tears from mine eyes are falling as the rain from heaven falls, and I am destitute and full of woe. What have I done that thou hast turned from me? Have I neglected homage to my God, and thee my goddess? O deliver me, and all my sins forgive, that I may share thy love, and be watched over in thy fold. And may thy fold be wide, thy pen secure. How long wilt thou be angry? Hear my cry, and turn again to prosper all my ways. O may thy wrath be crumbled and withdrawn, as by a crumbling stream. Then smite my foes, and take away their power to work me ill, that I may crush them. Hearken to my prayer, and bless me, so that all who me behold may laud thee, and may magnify thy name, while I exalt thy power over all. Ishtar is highest, Ishtar is the queen Ishtar, the peerless daughter of the moon. Chapter II, the land of rivers and the god of the deep. Ancient Babylonia was for over 4,000 years the garden of Western Asia. In the days of Hezekiah and Isaiah, when it had come under the sway of the younger civilization of Assyria on the north, it was a land of corn and wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of oil, olive, and of honey. Herodotus found it still flourishing and extremely fertile. "This territory," he wrote, "is of all that we know the best by far for producing grain. It is so good that it returns as much as 200-fold for the average, and when it bears at its best, it produces 300-fold. The blades of the wheat and barley, they grow to be full 4 fingers broad, and from millet and sesame seed, how large a tree grows, I know myself, but shall not record, being well aware that even what has already been said relating to the crops produced has been enough to cause disbelief in those who have not visited Babylonia. Today great tracts of undulating moorland, which aforetime yielded 2 and 3 crops a year, are in summer partly barren wastes, and partly jungle and reedy swamp. Bedouins camp beside sandy heaps which were once populous and thriving cities, and here and there the shrunken remnants of a people once great and influential eke out precarious livings under the oppression of Turkish tax-gatherers who are scarcely less considerate than the plundering nomads of the desert. This historic country is bounded on the east by Persia and on the west by the Arabian desert. In shape somewhat resembling a fish, it lies between the 2 great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, 100 miles wide at its broadest part, and narrowing to 35 miles towards the tail in the latitude of Baghdad. The head converges to a point above Basra, where the rivers meet and form the Shatt el-Arab, which pours into the Persian Gulf after meeting the Karun and drawing away the main volume of that double-mouthed river. The distance from Baghdad to Basra is about 300 miles, and the area traversed by the Shatt el-Arab is slowly extending at the rate of a mile every 30 years or so, as a result of the steady accumulation of silt and mud carried down by the Tigris and Euphrates. When Sumeria was beginning to flourish, these 2 rivers had separate outlets, and Eridu, the seat of the cult of the sea god E, which now lies 125 miles inland, was a seaport at the head of the Persian Gulf. A day's journey separated the river mouths when Alexander the Great broke the power of the Persian Empire. In the days of Babylonia's prosperity, the Euphrates was hailed as the soul of the land, and the Tigris as the bestower of blessings. Skillful engineers had solved the problem of water distribution by irrigating sun-parched areas and preventing the excessive flooding of those districts, which are now rendered impassable swamps when the rivers overflow. A network of canals was constructed throughout the country, which restricted the destructive tendencies of the Tigris and Euphrates and developed to a high degree their potentialities as fertilizing agencies. The greatest of these canals appear to have been anciently river beds. One, which is called Shatt en-Nil to the north, and Shatt el-Kar to the south, curved eastward from Babylon, and sweeping past Nipwa, flowed like the letter S towards Lhasa, and then rejoined the river. It is believed to mark the course followed in the early Sumerian period by the Euphrates River, which has moved steadily westward many miles beyond the sites of ancient cities that were erected on its banks. Another important canal, the Shatt el-Hai, crossed the plain from the Tigris to its sister river, which lies lower at this point and does not run so fast. Where the artificial canals were constructed on higher levels than the streams which fed them, the water was raised by contrivances known as shaduffs. The buckets, or skin bags, were roped to a weighted beam, with the aid of which they were swung up by workmen and emptied into the canals. It is possible that this toilsome mode of irrigation was substituted in favorable parts by the primitive water wheels, which are used in our own day by the inhabitants of the country who cultivate strips of land along the river banks. In Babylonia, there are two seasons, the rainy and the dry. Rain falls from November till March, and the plain is carpeted in spring by patches of vivid green verdure and brilliant wild flowers. Then the period of drought ensues. The sun rapidly burns up all vegetation, and everywhere the eye is wearied by long stretches of brown and yellow desert. Occasional sandstorms darken the heavens, sweeping over sterile wastes and piling up the shapeless mounds which mark the sites of ancient cities. Meanwhile, the rivers are increasing in volume, being fed by the melting snows at their mountain sources far to the north. The swift Tigris, which is 1146 miles long, begins to rise early in March and reaches its highest level in May. Before the end of June, it again subsides. More sluggish in movement, the Euphrates, which is 1780 miles long, shows signs of rising a fortnight later than the Tigris, and is in flood for a more extended period. It does not shrink to its lowest level until early in September. By controlling the flow of these mighty rivers, preventing disastrous floods, and storing and distributing surplus water, the ancient Babylonians developed to the full the natural resources of their country and made it what it may once again become one of the fairest and most habitable areas in the world. Nature conferred upon them bountiful rewards for their labor, trade and industries flourished, and the cities increased in splendor and strength. Then as now the heat was great during the long summer, but remarkably dry and unvarying, while the air was ever wonderfully transparent under cloudless skies of vivid blue. The nights were cool and of great beauty, whether in brilliant moonlight or when ponds and canals were jeweled by the lustrous displays of clear and numerous stars, which glorified that homeland of the earliest astronomers. Babylonia is a treeless country, and timber had to be imported from the earliest times. The date palm was probably introduced by man, as was certainly the vine and the fig tree, which were widely cultivated, especially in the north. Stone, suitable for building, was very scarce, and limestone, alabaster, marble, and basalt had to be taken from northern Mesopotamia, where the mountains also yield copper and lead and iron. Except Eridu, where ancient workers quarried sandstone from its C-shaped ridge, all the cities were built of brick, an excellent clay being found in abundance. When brick walls were cemented with bitumen, they were given great stability. This resinous substance is found in the north and south. It bubbles up through crevices of rocks on river banks and forms small ponds. Two famous springs at modern Hit, on the Euphrates, have been drawn upon from time immemorial. From one, writes a traveler, flows hot water black with bitumen, while the other discharges intermittently bitumen, or after a rainstorm, bitumen and cold water. Where rocks crop out in the plain above Hit, they are full of seams of bitumen. Present-day Arabs call it kiara and export it for coating boats and roofs. They also use it as an antiseptic and apply it to cure the skin diseases from which camels suffer. Sumeria had many surplus products, including corn and figs, pottery, fine wool and woven garments, to offer in exchange for what it most required from other countries. It must therefore have had a brisk and flourishing foreign trade at an exceedingly remote period. No doubt numerous alien merchants were attracted to its cities, and it may be that they induced or encouraged Semitic and other raiders to overthrow governments and form military aristocracies, so that they themselves might obtain necessary concessions and achieve a degree of political ascendancy. It does not follow, however, that the peasant class was greatly affected by periodic revolutions of this kind, which brought little more to them than a change of rulers. The needs of the country necessitated the continuance of agricultural methods and the rigid observance of existing land laws. Indeed, these constituted the basis of Sumerian prosperity. Conquerors have ever sought reward not merely in spoil, but also the services of the conquered. In northern Babylonia, the invaders apparently found it necessary to conciliate and secure the continued allegiance of the tillers of the soil. Law and religion being closely associated, they had to adapt their gods to suit the requirements of existing social and political organizations. A deity of pastoral nomads had to receive attributes which would give him an agricultural significance. One of rural character had to be changed to respond to the various calls of city life. Besides, local gods could not be ignored on account of their popularity. As a result, imported beliefs and religious customs must have been fused and absorbed according to their bearing on modes of life in various localities. It is probable that the complex character of certain deities was due to the process of adjustment to which they were subjected in new environments. The petty kingdoms of Sumeria appear to have been tribal in origin. Each city was presided over by a deity who was the nominal owner of the surrounding arable land. Farms were rented or purchased from the priesthood, and pasture was held in common. As in Egypt, where we find, for instance, the artisan god Ptah supreme at Memphis, the sun god Ra at Heliopolis, and the cat goddess Bast at Bubastes, the various local Sumerian and Akkadian deities had distinctive characteristics, and similarly showed a tendency to absorb the attributes of their rivals. The chief deity of a state was the central figure in a pantheon, which had its political aspect and influenced the growth of local theology. Cities, however, did not, as a rule, bear the names of deities, which suggests that several were founded when Sumerian religion was in its early animistic stages, and gods and goddesses were not sharply defined from the various spirit groups. A distinctive and characteristic Sumerian god was E, who was supreme at the ancient sea-deserted port of Eridu. He is identified with the Ones of Berossus, who referred to the deity as a creature endowed with reason, with a body like that of a fish, with feet below like those of a man, with a fish's tail. This description recalls the familiar figures of Egyptian gods and priests attired in the skins of the sacred animals from whom their powers were derived, and the fairy lore about swan maids and men, and the seals and other animals who could divest themselves of their skin coverings and appear in human shape. Originally, E may have been a sacred fish. The Indian creative gods Brahma and Vishnu had fish forms. In Sanskrit literature, Manu, the eponymous first man, is instructed by the fish to build a ship in which to save himself when the world would be purged by the rising waters. He befriended in similar manner the Babylonian Noah, called Pernapishtim, advising him to build a vessel so as to be prepared for the approaching deluge. Indeed, the Indian legend appears to throw light on the original Sumerian conception of E. It relates that when the fish was small and in danger of being swallowed by other fish in a stream, it appealed to Manu for protection. The sage at once lifted up the fish and placed it in a jar of water. It gradually increased in bulk, and he transferred it next to a tank and then to the river Ganges. In time, the fish complained to Manu that the river was too small for it, so he carried it to the sea. For these services, the god in fish form instructed Manu regarding the approaching flood, and afterwards piloted his ship through the weltering waters until it rested on a mountain top. If this Indian myth is of Babylonian origin, as appears probable, it may be that the spirit of the river Euphrates, the soul of the land, was identified with a migrating fish. The growth of the fish suggests the growth of the river rising in flood. In Celtic folk tales, high tides and valley floods are accounted for by the presence of a great beast in sea, loch, or river. In a class of legends, specially connected with the worship of Atargates, wrote Professor Robertson Smith, the divine life of the waters resides in the sacred fish that inhabit them. Atargates and her son, according to a legend common to Hierapolis and Ascalon, plunged into the waters in the first case the Euphrates, in the second, the sacred pool at the temple near the townland, were changed into fishes. The idea is that where a god dies, that is, ceases to exist in human form, his life passes into the waters where he is buried. And this again is merely a theory to bring the divine water or the divine fish into harmony with anthropomorphic ideas. The same thing was sometimes affected in another way by saying that the anthropomorphic deity was born from the water, as Aphrodite sprang from sea foam, or as Atargates, in another form of the Euphrates legend, was born of an egg which the sacred fishes found in the Euphrates and pushed ashore. As Sharapsi, E was the king of the watery deep. The reference, however, according to Jastrow, is not to the salt ocean, but the sweet waters flowing under the earth which feed the streams, and through streams and canals irrigate the fields. As Babylonia was fertilized by its rivers, E, the fish god, was a fertilizing deity. In Egypt, the mother of Mendes is depicted carrying a fish upon her head. She links with Isis and Hathor. Her husband is Barneb-Tetu, a form of Ptah, Osiris, and Ra, and as a god of fertility he is symbolized by the ram. Another Egyptian fish deity was the god Rem, whose name signifies to weep. He wept fertilizing tears, and corn was sown and reaped amidst lamentations. He may be identical with Remi, who was a phase of Sebek, the crocodile god, a developed attribute of Nu, the vague primitive Egyptian deity who symbolized the primordial deep. The connection between a fish god and a corn god is not necessarily remote when we consider that in Babylonia and Egypt the harvest was the gift of the rivers. The Euphrates, indeed, was hailed as a creator of all that grew on its banks. O thou river, who didst create all things! When the great gods dug thee out, they set prosperity upon thy banks. Within thee, the king of the deep, created his dwelling. Thou judgest the cause of mankind. O river, thou art mighty. O river, thou art supreme. O river, thou art righteous. In serving the embodiment or the water spirit, by leading him, as the Indian Manu led the creator and preserver in fish form, from river to water pot to pond or canal, and then again to river and ocean, the Babylonians became expert engineers and experienced agriculturists, the makers of bricks, the builders of cities, the framers of laws. Indeed, their civilization was a growth of E-worship. E was their instructor. Berosus states that as Ones, he lived in the Persian Gulf, and every day came ashore to instruct the inhabitants of Eridu how to make canals, to grow crops, to work metals, to make pottery and bricks, and to build temples. He was the artisan god Nunura, god of the potter, Cuskabanda, god of goldsmiths, and See, the divine patron of the arts and crafts. He knoweth everything, chanted the hymn maker. He taught the people how to form and use alphabetic signs and instructed them in mathematics. He gave them their code of laws. Like the Egyptian artisan god Ptah and the linking deity Khnumu, he was the potter or molder of gods and man. Ptah molded the first man on his potter's wheel. He also molded the sun and moon. He shaped the universe and hammered out the copper sky. He built the world as an architect builds a house. Similarly, the Vedic Indra, who wielded a hammer like Ptah, fashioned the universe after the simple manner in which the Aryans made their wooden dwellings. Like Ptah, he also developed from an artisan god into a sublime creator in the highest sense, not merely as a producer of crops. His word became the creative force. He named those things he desired to be, and they came into existence. Who but he creates things, exclaimed a priestly poet. This change from artisan god to creator, Nudamud, may have been due to the tendency of early religious cults to attach to their chief god the attributes of rivals exalted at other centers. E, whose name is also rendered Ara, was identified with Yah, or O, the Jah of the Hebrews. In Yadaganu, Jah is Dagon, writes Professor Pinches. We have the elements reversed, showing a wish to identify Jah with Dagon rather than Dagon with Jah, whilst another interesting name, Or, shows an identification of Jah with Ara, two names which have every appearance of being etymologically connected. Jah's name is one of the words for God in the Syro-Babylonian language. E was Enki, Lord of the world, or Lord of what is beneath, Amaranakai. Lord of heaven and earth, Sarkalama, ruler of the land, as well as Engur, god of the abyss, Nakbu, the deep, and Lugalida, king of the river. As rain fell from the waters above the firmament, the god of waters was also a sky and earth god. The Indian Varuna was similarly a sky as well as an ocean god, before the theorizing and systematizing Brahmanic teachers relegated him to a permanent abode at the bottom of the sea. It may be that Eons and Varuna were of common origin. Another Babylonian deity named Dagon is believed to be identical with E. His worship was certainly of great antiquity. Hammurabi, writes Professor Pinches, seems to speak of the Euphrates as being the boundary of Dagon, whom he calls his creator. In later inscriptions, the form Daguna, which approaches nearer to the West Semitic form, Dagon of the Philistines, is found in a few personal names. It is possible that the Philistine deity Dagon was a specialized form of ancient E, who was either imported from Babylonia or was a sea god of more than one branch of the Mediterranean race. The authorities are at variance regarding the form and attributes of Dagon. Our knowledge regarding him is derived mainly from the Bible. He was a national rather than a city god. There are references to Beit Dagon, house or city of Dagon. He had also a temple at Gaza, and Samson destroyed it by pulling down the two middle pillars which were its main support. A third temple was situated in Ashdod. When the captured ark of the Israelites was placed in it, the image of Dagon fell on his face, with the result that the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left. A further reference to the threshold of Dagon suggests that the god had feet like eons. Those who hold that Dagon had a fish form derive his name from the Semitic dag equals a fish, and suggest that after the idol fell, only the fishy part, Dago, was left. On the other hand, it was argued that Dagon was a corn god, and that the resemblance between the words Dagon and Dagon are accidental. Professor Sayce makes reference in this connection to a crystal seal from Phoenicia in the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford, bearing an inscription which he reads as Baal Dagon. Near the name is an ear of corn and other symbols such as the winged solar disk, a gazelle and several stars, but there is no fish. It may be, of course, that Baal Dagon represents a fusion of deities. As we have seen in the case of Eons and the deities of Mendes, a fish god may also be a corn god, a land animal god, and a god of ocean and the sky. The offering of golden mice representing your mice that mar the land, made by the Philistines, suggests that Dagon was the fertilizing harvest god, among other things, whose usefulness had been impaired, as they believed, by the mistake committed of placing the Ark of Israel in the temple at Ashdod. The Philistines came from Crete, and if their Dagon was imported from that island, he may have had some connection with Poseidon, whose worship extended throughout Greece. This god of the sea, who is somewhat like the Roman Neptune, carried a lightning trident and caused earthquakes. He was a brother of Zeus, the sky and atmosphere deity, and had bull and horse forms. As a horse he pursued Demeter, the earth and corn goddess, and like he instructed mankind, but especially in the art of training horses. In his train were the Tritons, half men, half fishes, and the water fairies, the Nereids. Bulls, boars, and rams were offered to this sea god of fertility. Amphitrite was his spouse. An obscure god Shoni, the Ones of the Scottish Hebrides, received oblations from those who depended for their agricultural prosperity on his gifts of fertilizing seaweed. He is referred to in Martin's Western Isles, and is not yet forgotten. The Eddic sea god Njord of Noton was the father of Frey, the harvest god. Dagda, the Irish corn god, had for wife Bone, the goddess of the river Boyne. Osiris and Isis of Egypt were associated with the Nile. The connection between agriculture and the water supply was too obvious to escape the early symbolists, and many other proofs of this than those referred to could be given. E's faithful spouse was the goddess Damkina, who was also called Ninkai, Lady of the Earth. May E make thee glad, chanted the priests. May Damkina, Queen of the Deep, illumine thee with her countenance. May Merodach Marduk, the mighty overseer of the Igigi heavenly spirits, exalt thy head. Merodach was their son. In time he became the Bel, or Lord, of the Babylonian pantheon. Like the Indian Varuna, the sea god, Eons had control over the spirits and demons of the deep. The ferryman, who kept watch over the river of death, was called Aradi, servant of E. There are also references to sea maidens, the Babylonian mermaids, or Nereids. We have a glimpse of sea giants, which resemble the Indian Danavas and Daityas of ocean in the chant. 7 are they, 7 are they. In the ocean deep 7 are they. Battening in heaven 7 are they. Bred in the depths of ocean. Of these 7, the first is the south wind. The second, a dragon with mouth agape. A suggestion of the Vedic Vritra and his horde of monsters. The 7 demons were also the messengers of Anu, who, although specialized as a sky god in more than one pantheon, appears to have been closely associated with E in the earliest Sumerian period. His name, signifying the High One, is derived from Ana, heaven. He was the city god of Erech Uruk. It is possible that he was developed as an atmospheric god with solar and lunar attributes. The seven demons, who were his messengers, recall the stormy Maruts, the followers of Indra. They are referred to as forcing their way with baneful windstorms. Mighty destroyers, the deluge of the storm god. Stalking at the right hand of the storm god. When we deal with a deity in his most archaic form, it is difficult to distinguish him from a demon. Even the beneficent is associated with monsters and furies. Evil spirits, according to a Babylonian chant, were the bitter venom of the gods. Those attached to a deity as attendants appear to represent the original animistic group from which he evolved. In each district, the character of the deity was shaped to accord with local conditions. At Nipur, which was situated on the vague and shifting boundary line between Sumer and Akkad, the chief god was Enlil, whose name is translated Lord of Mist, Lord of Might, and Lord of Demons by various authorities. He was a storm god and a war god, and Lord of Heaven and Earth, like and Anu. An atmospheric deity, he shares the attributes of the Indian Indra, the thunder and rain god, and Vayu, the wind god. He also resembles the Semitic Adad or Rimmon, who links with the Hittite Taku. All these are deities of tempest and the mountain's wild huntsmen in the raging host. The name of Enlil's temple at Nippur has been translated as mountain house, or like a mountain, and the theory obtained for a time that the god must therefore have been imported by a people from the hills. But as the ideogram for mountain and land was used in the earliest times, as King shows, with reference to foreign countries, it is more probable that Enlil was exalted as a world god who had dominion over not only Sumer and Akkad, but also the territories occupied by the rivals and enemies of the early Babylonians. Enlil is known as the older Bel, Lord, to distinguish him from Bel-Merodach of Babylon. He was the chief figure in a triad in which he figured as earth god, with Anu as god of the sky and as god of the deep. This classification suggests that Nippur had either risen in political importance and dominated the cities of Erech and Eridu, or that its priests were influential at the court of a ruler who was the overlord of several city-states. Associated with Bel-Enlil was Beltis, later known as Beltu the Lady. She appears to be identical with the other great goddesses, Ishtar, Nana, Zerpanitum, and Si, a great mother or consort of an early god with whom she was equal in power and dignity. In the later systematized theology of the Babylonians, we seem to trace the fragments of a primitive mythology which was vague in outline, for the deities were not sharply defined and existed in groups. Enneads were formed in Egypt by placing a local god at the head of a group of 8 elder deities. The sun god Ra was the chief figure of the earliest pantheon of this character at Heliopolis, while at Hermopolis, the leader was the lunar god Thoth. Professor Budge is of opinion that both the Sumerians and the early Egyptians derived their primeval gods from some common but exceedingly ancient source. For he finds in the Babylonian and Nile valleys that there is a resemblance between two early groups, which seems to be too close to be accidental. The Egyptian group comprises 4 pairs of vague gods and goddesses Nu and his consort Nut, Hehu and his consort Hehut, Kekui and his consort Kekuit, and Ker and his consort Kerhit. Man always has fashioned, he says, and probably always will fashion, his god or gods in his own image, and he has always having reached a certain stage in development, given to his gods wives and offspring. But the nature of the position taken by the wives of the gods depends upon the nature of the position of women in the households of those who write the legends and the traditions of the gods. The gods of the oldest company in Egypt were, the writer believes, invented by people in whose households women held a high position, and among whom they possessed more power than is usually the case with Oriental peoples. We cannot say definitely what these various deities represent. Nu was the spirit of the primordial deep, and Nut of the waters above the heavens, the mother of moon and sun and the stars. The others were phases of light and darkness, and the forces of nature in activity and repose. Nu is represented in Babylonian mythology by Apsu-Rishtu, and Nut by Mummu Tiamat or Tiamat. The next pair is Lachmu and Lachamu, and the third, Anshar and Kishar. The fourth pair is missing, but the names of Anu and E, as Nudimud, are mentioned in the first tablet of the creation series, and the name of a third is lost. Professor Budge thinks that the Assyrian editors substituted the ancient triad of Anu, E, and Enlil for the pair which would correspond to those found in Egypt. Originally, the wives of Anu and E may have made up the group of 8 primitive deities. There can be little doubt but that E, as he survives to us, is of later characterization than the first pair of primitive deities who symbolized the deep. The attributes of this beneficent god reflect the progress and the social and moral ideals of a people well advanced in civilization. He rewarded mankind for the services they rendered to him. He was their leader and instructor. He achieved for them the victories over the destructive forces of nature. In brief, he was the dragon slayer, a distinction, by the way, which was attached in later times to his son Merodach, the Babylonian god, although E was still credited with the victory over the dragon's husband. When E was one of the pre-Babylonian group, the triad of Bel-Enlil, Anu, and Ihi resembled the Indian Vishnu, the preserver, while Bel-Enlil resembled Shiva, the destroyer, and Anu, the father, supreme Brahma, the creator and father of all. The difference in exact adjustment being due, perhaps, to Sumerian political conditions. E, as we have seen, symbolized the beneficence of the waters. Their destructive force was represented by Tiamat or Tiamat, the dragon, and Apsu, her husband, the archenemy of the gods. We shall find these elder demons figuring in the Babylonian creation myth, which receives treatment in a later chapter. The ancient Sumerian city of Eridu, which means on the seashore, was invested with great sanctity from the earliest times, and E, the great magician of the gods, was invoked by workers of spells, the priestly magicians of historic Babylonia. Excavations have shown that Eridu was protected by a retaining wall of sandstone, of which material many of its houses were made. In its temple tower, built of brick, was a marble stairway, and evidences have been forthcoming that in the later Sumerian period the structure was lavishly adorned. It is referred to in the fragments of early literature which have survived as the splendid house, shady as the forest, that none may enter. The mythological spell exercised by Eridu in later times suggests that the civilization of Sumeria owed much to the worshippers of E. At the sacred city, the first man was created. There the souls of the dead passed towards the great deep. Its proximity to the sea was Ninbubu, god of the sailor, may have brought it into contact with other peoples and other early civilizations. Like the early Egyptians, The early Sumerians may have been in touch with Punt, Somaliland, which some regard as the cradle of the Mediterranean race. The Egyptians obtained from that sacred land incense-bearing trees which had magical potency. In a fragmentary Babylonian charm, there is a reference to a sacred tree or bush at Eridu. Professor Sayce has suggested that it is the biblical tree of life in the Garden of Eden. His translations of certain vital words, however, is sharply questioned by Mr. R. Campbell Thompson of the British Museum, who does not accept the theory. It may be that E's sacred bush or tree is a survival of tree and water worship. If Eridu was not the cradle of the Sumerian race, it was possibly the cradle of Sumerian civilization. Here, amidst the shifting rivers in early times, the agriculturists may have learned to control and distribute the water supply by utilizing dried-up beds of streams to irrigate the land. Whatever successes they achieved were credited to E, their instructor and patron. He was Nadimud, god of everything. Chapter III. Rival pantheons and representative deities. In dealing with the city cults of Sumer and Akkad, consideration must be given to the problems involved by the rival mythological systems. Pantheons not only varied in detail, but were presided over by different supreme gods. One city's chief deity might be regarded as a secondary deity at another center. Although E, for instance, was given first place at Eridu and was so pronouncedly Sumerian in character, the moon god Nannar remained supreme at while the sun god, whose Semitic name was Shamus, presided at Lhasa and Sippar. Other deities were similarly exalted in other states. As has been indicated, a mythological system must have been strongly influenced by city politics. To hold a community in sway, it was necessary to recognize officially the various gods worshipped by different sections, so as to secure the constant allegiance of all classes to their rulers. Alien deities were therefore associated with local and tribal deities, those of the nomads with those of the agriculturists, those of the unlettered folks with those of the learned people. Reference has been made to the introduction of strange deities by conquerors, but these were not always imposed upon a community by violent means. Indications are not wanting that the worshippers of alien gods were sometimes welcomed and encouraged to settle in certain states. When they came as military allies to assist a city folk against a fierce enemy, they were naturally much admired and praised, honored by the women and the bards, and rewarded by the rulers. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Babylonian Hercules, we meet with Eabani, a Goliath of the wilds, who is entreated to come to the aid of the besieged city of Erech, when it seemed that its deities were unable to help the people against their enemies. The gods of wall-drowned Erech. To flies had turned and buzzed in the streets. The winged bulls of wall-drowned Erech were turned to mice and departed through the holes. Eabani was attracted to Erech by the gift of a fair woman for wife. The poet who lauded him no doubt mirrored public opinion. We can see the slim, shaven Sumerians gazing with wonder and admiration on their rough, heroic ally. All his body was covered with hair. His locks were like a woman's. Thick as corn grew his abundant hair. He was a stranger to the people, and in that land, clad in a garment like Jera, the god. He had eaten grass with the gazelles. He had drunk water with savage beasts. His delight was to be among water dwellers. Like the giant Alban, the eponymous ancestor of a people who invaded prehistoric Britain, Eabani appears to have represented in Babylonian folk legends a certain type of foreign settlers in the land. No doubt the city dwellers, who were impressed by the prowess of the hairy and powerful warriors, were also ready to acknowledge the greatness of their war gods, and to admit them into the pantheon. The fusion of beliefs which followed must have stimulated thought and been productive of speculative ideas. Nowhere, remarks Professor Jastrow, does a high form of culture arise without the commingling of diverse ethnic elements. We must also take into account the influence exercised by leaders of thought like Enwi Durang Kai, the famous high priest of Sipar, whose piety did much to increase the reputation of the cult of Shamash, the sun god. The teachings and example of Buddha, for instance, revolutionized Brahmanic religion in India. A mythology was an attempt to solve the riddle of the universe and to adjust the relations of mankind with the various forces represented by the deities. The priests systematized existing folk beliefs and established an official religion. To secure the prosperity of the state, it was considered necessary to render homage unto whom homage was due at various seasons and under various circumstances. The religious attitude of a particular community, therefore, must have been largely dependent on its needs and experiences. The food supply was a first consideration. At Eridu, as we have seen, it was assured by devotion to E and obedience to his commands as an instructor. Elsewhere it might happen, however, that E's gifts were restricted or withheld by an obstructing force, the raging storm god, or the parching, pestilence-bringing deity of the sun. It was necessary, therefore, for the people to win the favor of the god or goddess who seemed most powerful, and was accordingly considered to be the greatest in a particular district. A rain god presided over the destinies of one community, and a god of disease and death over another. A third exalted the war god, no doubt because raids were frequent, and the city owed its strength and prosperity to its battles and conquests. The reputation won by a particular god throughout Babylonia would depend greatly on the achievements of his worshippers and the progress of the city civilization over which he presided. Bel-Enlil's fame as a war deity was probably due to the political supremacy of his city of Nippur, and there was probably good reason for attributing to the sun god a pronounced administrative and legal character. He may have controlled the destinies of exceedingly well-organized communities in which law and order and authority were held in high esteem. In accounting for the rise of distinctive and rival city deities, we should also consider the influence of divergent conceptions regarding the origin of life in mingled communities. Each foreign element in a community had its own intellectual life and immemorial tribal traditions, which reflected ancient habits of life and perpetuated the doctrines of eponymous ancestors. Among the agricultural classes, the folk religion which entered so intimately into their customs and labors must have remained essentially Babylonish in character. In cities, however, where official religions were formulated, foreign ideas were more apt to be imposed, especially when embraced by influential teachers. It is not surprising, therefore, to find that in Babylonia, as in Egypt, there were differences of opinion regarding the origin of life and the particular natural element which represented the vital principle. One section of the people, who were represented by the worshippers of E, appear to have believed that the essence of life was contained in water. The god of Eridu was the source of the water of life. He fertilized parched and sunburnt wastes through rivers and irrigating canals, and conferred upon man the sustaining food of life. When life came to an end, food of death will be offered thee. Water of death will be offered thee. Offerings of water and food were made to the dead, so that the ghosts might be nourished and prevented from troubling the living. Even the gods required water and food. They were immortal because they had drunk ambrosia and eaten from the plant of life. When the goddess Ishtar was in the underworld, the land of the dead, the servant of E exclaimed, "Hail, lady, may the well give me of its waters, so that I may drink." The goddess of the dead commanded her servant to sprinkle the lady Ishtar with the water of life and bid her depart. The sacred water might also be found at a confluence of rivers. E bade his son, Merodach, to draw water from the mouth of 2 streams, and on this water to put his pure spell. The worship of rivers and wells which prevailed in many countries was connected with the belief that the principle of life was in moisture. In India, water was vitalized by the intoxicating juice of the soma plant, which inspired priests to utter prophecies and filled their hearts with religious fervor. Drinking customs had originally a religious significance. It was believed in India that the sap of plants was influenced by the moon, the source of vitalizing moisture and the hiding place of the mead of the gods. The Teutonic gods also drank this mead, and poets were inspired by it. Similar beliefs obtained among various peoples. Moon and water worship were therefore closely associated. The blood of animals and the sap of plants were vitalized by the water of life and under control of the moon. The body moisture of gods and demons had vitalizing properties. When the Indian creator, Prajapati, wept at the beginning, that the tears which fell into the water became the air, that which he wiped away upwards became the sky. The ancient Egyptians believed that all men were born from the eyes of Horus, except Negroes, who came from other parts of his body. The creative tears of Ra, the sun god, fell as shining rays upon the earth. When this god grew old, saliva dripped from his mouth, and Isis mixed the vitalizing moisture with dust, and thus made the serpent which bit and paralyzed the great solar deity. Other Egyptian deities, including Osiris and Isis, wept creative tears. Those which fell from the eyes of the evil gods produced poisonous plants and various baneful animals. Orion, the Greek giant, sprang from the body moisture of deities. The weeping ceremonies in connection with agricultural rites were no doubt believed to be of magical potency. They encouraged the god to weep creative tears. E, the god of the deep, was also lord of life. Enki, king of the river, Lugalida, and god of creation, Nudimud. His aid was invoked by means of magical formulae. As the great magician of the gods, he uttered charms himself and was the patron of all magicians. One spell runs as follows. I am the sorcerer priest of E. To revive the sick man. The great Lord E hath sent me. He hath added his pure spell to mine. He hath added his pure voice to mine. He hath added his pure spittle to mine. Saliva, like tears, had creative and therefore curative qualities. It also expelled and injured demons and brought good luck. Spitting ceremonies are referred to in the religious literature of ancient Egypt. When the eye of Ra was blinded by Set, Thoth spat in it to restore vision. The sun god Tum, who was linked with Ra as Ra Tum, spat on the ground, and his saliva became the god's shoe and tefnut. In the underworld, the devil serpent Apep was spat upon to curse it, as was also its waxen image, which the priests fashioned. Several African tribes spit to make compacts, declare friendship, and to curse. Park, the explorer, refers in his travels to his carriers spitting on a flat stone to ensure a good journey. Arabian holy men and descendants of Mohammed spit to cure diseases. Mohammed spat in the mouth of his grandson Hassan soon after birth. Theocritus, Sophocles, and Plutarch testify to the ancient Grecian customs of spitting to cure and to curse, and also to bless when children were named. Pliny has expressed belief in the efficacy of the fasting spittle for curing disease, and referred to the custom of spitting to avert witchcraft. In England, Scotland, and Ireland, spitting customs are not yet obsolete. North of England, boys used to talk of spitting their souls. When the Newcastle colliers held their earliest strikes, they made compacts by spitting on a stone. There are still spitting stones in the north of Scotland. When bargains are made in rural districts, hands are spat upon before they are shaken. The first money taken each day by fishwives and other dealers is spat upon to ensure increased drawings. Brand, who refers to various spitting customs, quotes Scott's discovery of witchcraft regarding the saliva cure for king's evil, which is still, by the way, practiced in the Hebrides. Like Pliny, Scott recommended ceremonial spitting as a charm against witchcraft. In China, spitting to expel demons is a common practice. We still call a hasty person a spitfire and a calumniator a spit poison. The life principle in trees and sea, as we have seen, was believed to have been derived from the tears of deities. In India, sap was called the blood of trees, and references to bleeding trees are still widespread and common. Among the ancients, wrote Professor Robertson Smith, blood is generally conceived as the principle or vehicle of life, and so the account often given of sacred waters is that the blood of the deity flows in them. Thus, as Milton writes, smooth Adonis from his native rock ran purple to the sea, supposed with blood of Tammuz yearly wounded. The ruddy color which the swollen river derived from the soil at a certain season was ascribed to the blood of the god, who received his death wound in Lebanon at that time of the year, and lay buried beside the sacred source. In Babylonia, the river was regarded as the source of the lifeblood and the seat of the soul. No doubt this theory was based on the fact that the human liver contains about a sixth of the blood in the body, the largest proportion required by any single organ. Jeremiah makes Mother Jerusalem exclaim, "My liver is poured upon the earth for the destruction of the daughter of my people," meaning that her life is spent with grief. Inspiration was derived by drinking blood, as well as by drinking intoxicating liquors, the mead of the gods. Indian magicians who drink the blood of the goat sacrificed to the goddess Kali are believed to be temporarily possessed by her spirit and thus enabled to prophesy. Malayan exorcists still expel demons while they suck the blood from a decapitated fowl. Similar customs were prevalent in ancient Greece. A woman who drank the blood of a sacrificed lamb or bull uttered prophetic sayings. While most Babylonians appear to have believed that the life principle was in blood, some were apparently of opinion that it was in breath, the air of life. A man died when he ceased to breathe. His spirit, therefore, it was argued, was identical with the atmosphere, the moving wind, and was accordingly derived from the atmospheric or wind god. When in the Gilgamesh epic, the hero invokes the dead Eabani the ghost rises up like a breath of wind. A Babylonian charm runs. The gods which seize on men came forth from the grave. The evil wind gusts have come forth from the graves to demand payment of rights and the pouring out of libations. They have come forth from the graves. All that is evil in their hosts, like a whirlwind, has come forth from the graves. The Hebrew Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, in Arabic Ra and Nefs, pass from meaning breath to spirit. In Egypt, the god Khnumu was Nef in his character as an atmospheric deity. The ascendancy of storm and wind gods in some Babylonian cities may have been due to the belief that they were the source of the air of life. It is possible that this conception was popularized by the Semites. Inspiration was perhaps derived from these deities by burning incense, which, if we follow evidence obtained elsewhere, induced a prophetic trance. The gods were also invoked by incense. In the flood legend, the Babylonian Noah burned incense. The gods smelled a sweet savor and gathered like flies over the sacrificer. In Egypt, devotees who inhaled the breath of the Apis bull were enabled to prophesy. In addition to water and atmospheric deities, Babylonia had also its fire gods, Giru, Jishbar, Jibal, and Nusku. Their origin is obscure. It is doubtful if their worshippers, like those of the Indian Agni, believed that fire, the vital spark, was the principle of life which was manifested by bodily heat. The Aryan fire worshippers cremated their dead so that the spirits might be transferred by fire to paradise. This practice, however, did not obtain among the fire worshippers of Persia, nor, as was once believed, in Sumer or Akkad either. Fire was, however, used in Babylonia for magical purposes. It destroyed demons and put to flight the spirits of disease. Possibly the fire purification ceremonies resembled those which were practiced by the Canaanites and are referred to in the Bible. Ahaz made his son to pass through the fire, according to the abominations of the heathen. Ezekiel declared that, when ye offer your gifts, when ye make your sons to pass through the fire, ye pollute yourselves with all your idols. In Leviticus it is laid down, Thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Moloch. It may be that in Babylonia the fire-cleansing ceremony resembled that which obtained at Beltane, May Day in Scotland, Germany, and other countries. Human sacrifices might also have been offered up as burnt offerings. Abraham, who came from the Sumerian city of Ur, was prepared to sacrifice Isaac, Sarah's firstborn. The fire gods of Babylonia never achieved the ascendancy of the Indian Agni. They appear to have resembled him mainly in so far as he was connected with the sun. Nusku, like Agni, was also the messenger of the gods. When Merodach, or Babylon, was exalted as chief god of the pantheon, his messages were carried to E by Nusku. He may have therefore symbolized the sun rays, for Merodach had solar attributes. It is possible that the belief obtained among even the water worshippers of Eridu that the sun and moon, which rose from the primordial deep, had their origin in the everlasting fire in E's domain at the bottom of the sea. In the Indian god, Varuna's ocean home and Asura fire, demon fire, burned constantly. It was bound and confined, but could not be extinguished. Fed by water, this fire, it was believed, would burst forth at the last day and consume the universe. A similar belief can be traced in Teutonic mythology. The Babylonian incantation cult appealed to many gods, but the most important share in the rites, says Jastrow, are taken by fire and water, suggesting, therefore, that the god of water, more particularly E, and the god of fire, are the chief deities on which the ritual itself hinges. In some temples there was a bit Rimki, a house of washing, and a bit Nuri, a house of light. It is possible, of course, that fire was regarded as the vital principle by some city cults, which were influenced by imported ideas. If so, the belief never became prevalent. The most enduring influence in Babylonian religion was the early Sumerian, and as Sumerian modes of thought were the outcome of habits of life necessitated by the character of the country, they were bound, sooner or later, to leave a deep impress on the minds of foreign peoples who settled in the Garden of Western Asia. It is not surprising, therefore, to find that imported deities assumed Babylonian characteristics and were identified or associated with Babylonian gods in the later imperial pantheon. Moon worship appears to have been as ancient as water worship, with which, as we have seen, it was closely associated. It was widely prevalent throughout Babylonia. The chief seat of the lunar deity, Nannar or Sin, was the ancient city of Ur, from which Abraham migrated to Haran, where the Baal, the Lord, was also a moon god. Ur was situated in Sumer in the south, between the west bank of the Euphrates and the low hills bordering the Arabian desert, and not far distant from sea-washed Eridu. No doubt, like that city, it had its origin at an exceedingly remote period. At any rate, the excavations conducted there have afforded proof that it flourished in the prehistoric period. As in Arabia, Egypt, and throughout ancient Europe and elsewhere, the moon god of Sumeria was regarded as the friend of man. He controlled nature as a fertilizing agency. He caused grass, trees, and crops to grow. He increased flocks and herds, and gave human offspring. At Ur he was exalted above E as the Lord and Prince of the gods, supreme in heaven, the Father of all. He was also called Great Anu, an indication that Anu, the sky god, had at one time a lunar character. The moon god was believed to be the father of the sun god. He was the great steer with mighty horns and perfect limbs. His name Sin is believed to be a corruption of Zuina, which signifies knowledge lord. Like the lunar Osiris of Egypt, he was apparently an instructor of mankind. The moon measured time and controlled the seasons. Seeds were sown at a certain phase of the moon, and crops were ripened by the harvest moon. The mountains of Sinai and the desert of Sin are called after this deity. As Nannar, which Jastrow considers to be a variation of Narnar, the light producer, the moon god scattered darkness and reduced the terrors of night. His spirit inhabited the lunar stone, so that moon and stone worship were closely associated. It also entered trees and crops, so that moon worship linked with earth worship, as both linked with water worship. The consort of Nannar was Ninurua, the lady of Ur, who is also called Ningala. She links with Ishtar as Nin, as Isis of Egypt linked with other mother deities. The twin children of the moon were Mashu and Mashtu, a brother and sister, like the lunar girl and boy of Teutonic mythology, immortalized in nursery rhymes as Jack and Jill. Sun worship was of great antiquity in Babylonia, but appears to have been seasonal in its earliest phases. No doubt the sky god Anu had his solar as well as his lunar attributes, which he shared with E. The spring sun was personified as Tammuz, the youthful shepherd, who was loved by the earth goddess Ishtar and her rival Ereshkigal, goddess of death, the Babylonian Persephone. During the winter Tammuz dwelt in Hades, and at the beginning of spring Ishtar descended to search for him among the shades. But the burning summer sun was symbolized as a destroyer, a slayer of men, and therefore a war god. As Ninip or Nirig, the son of Enlil, who was made in the likeness of Anu, he waged war against the earth spirits, and was furiously hostile towards the deities of alien peoples, as befitted a god of battle. Even his father feared him, and when he was advancing towards Nipur, sent out Nusku, messenger of the gods, to soothe the raging deity with soft words. Ninip was symbolized as a wild bull, was connected with stone worship. Like the Indian destroying god Shiva, and was similarly a deity of fate. He had much in common with Ningirsu, a god of Lagash, who was in turn regarded as a form of Tammuz. Nergal, another solar deity, brought disease and pestilence, and according to Jensen, all misfortunes due to excessive heat. He was the king of death, husband of Ereshkigal, queen of Hades. As a war god he thirsted for human blood, and was depicted as a mighty lion. He was the chief deity of the city of Cutha, which, Jastrow suggests, was situated beside a burial place of great repute, like the Egyptian Abydos. The two great cities of the sun in ancient Babylonia were the Akkadian Sippar and the Sumerian Lhasa. In these the sun god, Shamash or Baba, was the patron deity. He was a god of destiny, the lord of the living and the dead, and was exalted as the great judge, the lawgiver who upheld justice. He was the enemy of wrong. He loved righteousness and hated sin. He inspired his worshippers with rectitude and punished evildoers. The sun god also illumined the world, and his rays penetrated every quarter. He saw all things and read the thoughts of men. Nothing could be concealed from Shamash. One of his names was Mitra, like the god who was linked with Varuna in the Indian Rigveda. These twin deities, Mitra and Varuna, measured out the span of human life. They were the source of all heavenly gifts. They regulated sun and moon, the winds and waters, and the seasons. These did the gods establish in royal power over themselves, because they were wise and the children of wisdom, and because they excelled in power. Prof. Arnold's Trans of Rigvedic hymn. Mitra and Varuna were protectors of hearth and home, and they chastised sinners. In a striking passage of the Mahabharata, says Professor Moulton, one in which Indian thought comes nearest to the conception of conscience, a kingly wrongdoer is reminded that the sun sees secret sin. In Persian mythology, Mitra, as Mithra, is the patron of truth and the mediator between heaven and earth. This god was also worshipped by the military aristocracy of Mitanni, which held sway for a period over Assyria. In Roman times, the worship of Mithra spread into Europe from Persia. Mithraic sculptures depict the deity as a corn god slaying the harvest bull. On one of the monuments, corn stalks instead of blood are seen issuing from the wound inflicted with the knife. The Assyrian word, metru, signifies rain. As a sky god, Mitra may have been associated, like Varuna, with the waters above the firmament. Rain would therefore be gifted by him as a fertilizing deity. In the Babylonian flood legend, it is the sun god Shamash who appointed the time when the heavens were to rain destruction in the night, and commanded Pernapishtim, enter into the midst of thy ship, and shut thy door. The solar deity thus appears as a form of Anu, god of the sky and upper atmosphere, who controls the seasons and the various forces of nature. Other rival chiefs of city pantheons, whether lunar, atmospheric, earth, or water deities, were similarly regarded as the supreme deities who ruled the universe, and decreed when man should receive benefits or suffer from their acts of vengeance. It is possible that the close resemblances between Mithra and Mitra of the Aryan-speaking peoples of India and the Iranian plateau, and the sun god of the Babylonians, the Semitic Shamash, the Sumerian Utu are due to early contact and cultural influence through the medium of Elam. As a solar and corn god, the Persian Mithra links with Tammuz, as a sky and atmospheric deity with Anu, and as a god of truth, righteousness, and law with Shamash. We seem to trace, in the sublime Vedic hymns addressed by the Indian Aryans to Mitra and Varuna, the impress of Babylonian religious thought. Whate'er exists within this earth, and all within the sky, yea, all that is beyond, King Varuna perceives. O Varuna, whatever the offense may be, that we as men commit against the heavenly folk, when through our want of thought we violate thy laws, chastise us not, O God, for that iniquity. Shamash was similarly exalted in Babylonian hymns. The progeny of those who deal unjustly will not prosper. What their mouth utters in thy presence, thou wilt destroy. What issues from their mouth thou wilt dissipate. Thou knowest their transgressions, the plan of the wicked thou rejectest. All whoever they be are in thy care. He who takes no bribe, who cares for the oppressed, is favored by Shamash, his life shall be prolonged. The worshippers of Varuna and Mitra in the Punjab did not cremate their dead like those who exalted the rival fire god Agni. The grave was the house of clay, as in Babylonia. Mitra, who was identical with Yama, ruled over departed souls in the land of the Pitris, fathers, which was reached by crossing the mountains and the rushing stream of death. As we have seen, the Babylonian solar god Nergal was also the lord of the dead. As Marbandana, the boat of the sky, Shamash links with the Egyptian sun god Ra, whose bark sailed over the heavens by day and through the underworld of darkness and death during the night. The consort of Shamash was Ara, and his attendants were Kittu and Mesharu, truth and righteousness. Like the Hittites, the Babylonians had also a sun goddess. Her name was Ninsun, which Jastrow renders the annihilating lady. At Erech, she had a shrine in the temple of the sky god Anu. We can trace in Babylonia, as in Egypt, the early belief that life in the universe had a female origin. Ninsun links with Ishtar, whose Sumerian name is Nana. Ishtar appears to be identical with the Egyptian Hathor, who, as Sekhit, slaughtered the enemies of the sun god Ra. She was similarly the goddess of maternity and is depicted in this character, like Isis and other goddesses of similar character, suckling a babe. Another Babylonian lady of the gods was Ama, Mama, or Mami, the creatress of the seed of mankind, and was probably so called as the mother of all things. A characteristic atmospheric deity was Ramman, the Rimmon of the Bible, the Semitic Adu, Adad, Hadad, or Dadu. He was not a presiding deity in any pantheon, but was identified with Enlil at Nipwa. As a hammer god, he was imported by the Semites from the hills. He was a wind and thunder deity, a rain bringer, a corn god, and a god of battle like Thor, Jupiter, Taku, Indra, and others, who were all sons of the sky. In this brief review of the representative deities of early Babylonia, it will be seen that most gods link with Anu, and Enlil, whose attributes they symbolized in various forms. The prominence accorded to an individual deity depended on local conditions, experiences, and influences. Ceremonial practices no doubt varied here and there, but although one section might exalt and another Shamash, the religious faith of the people as a whole did not differ to any marked extent. They served the gods according to their lights, so that life might be prolonged and made prosperous, for the land of death and no return was regarded as a place of gloom and misery. When the Babylonians appear before us in the early stages of the historical period, they had reached that stage of development set forth so vividly in the orations of Isocrates. Those of the gods who are the source to us of good things have the title of Olympians. Those whose department is that of calamities and punishments have harsher titles. To the first class, both private persons and states erect altars and temples. The second is not worshipped either with prayers or burnt sacrifices, but in their case we perform ceremonies of riddance. The Sumerians, like the ancient Egyptians, developed their deities, who reflected the growth of culture from vague spirit groups, which like ghosts were hostile to mankind. Those spirits who could be propitiated were exalted as benevolent deities. Those who could not be bargained with were regarded as evil gods and goddesses. A better understanding of the character of Babylonian deities will therefore be obtained by passing the demons and evil spirits under review. Chapter IV: Demons, Fairies, and Ghosts. The memorable sermon preached by Paul to the Athenians when he stood in the midst of Mars Hill could have been addressed with equal appropriateness to the ancient Sumerians and Akkadians. "I perceive," he declared, "that in all things ye are too superstitious. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Forasmuch then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by art and man's device." Babylonian temples were houses of the gods in the literal sense. The gods were supposed to dwell in them, their spirits having entered into the graven images or blocks of stone. It is probable that like the ancient Egyptians, they believed a god had as many spirits as he had attributes. The gods, as we have said, appear to have evolved from early spirit groups. All the world swarmed with spirits, which inhabited stones and trees, mountains and deserts, rivers and ocean, the air, the sky, the stars, and the sun and moon. The spirits controlled nature. They brought light and darkness, sunshine and storm, summer and winter. They were manifested in the thunderstorm, the sandstorm, the glare of sunset, and the wraiths of mist rising from the steaming marshes. They controlled also the lives of men and women. The good spirits were the source of luck. The bad spirits caused misfortunes and were ever seeking to work evil against the Babylonian. Darkness was peopled by demons and ghosts of the dead. The spirits of disease were ever lying in wait to clutch him with cruel, invisible hands. Some modern writers, who are too prone to regard ancient peoples from a 20th century point of view, express grave doubts as to whether intelligent Babylonians really believed that spirits came down in the rain and entered the soil to rise up before men's eyes as stalks of barley or wheat. There is no reason for supposing that they thought otherwise. The early folks based their theories on the accumulated knowledge of their age. They knew nothing regarding the composition of water or the atmosphere, of the cause of thunder and lightning, or of the chemical changes effected in soils by the action of bacteria. They attributed all natural phenomena to the operations of spirits or gods. In believing that certain demons caused certain diseases, they may be said to have achieved distinct progress, for they anticipated the germ theory. They made discoveries, too, which have been approved and elaborated in later times when they lit sacred fires, bathed in sacred waters, and used oils and herbs to charm away spirits of pestilence. Indeed, many folk cures, which were originally associated with magical ceremonies, are still practiced in our own day. They were found to be effective by early observers, although they were unable to explain why and how cures were accomplished, like modern scientific investigators. In peopling the universe with spirits, the Babylonians, like other ancient folks, betrayed that tendency to symbolize everything which has ever appealed to the human mind. Our painters and poets and sculptors are greatest when they symbolize their ideals and ideas and impressions, and by so doing make us respond to their moods. Their beauty and their terror are sublime, but what may seem poetic to us was invariably a grim reality to the Babylonians. The statue or picture was not merely a work of art, but a manifestation of the god or demon. As has been said, they believed that the spirit of the god inhabited the idol. The frown of the brazen image was the frown of the wicked demon. They entertained as much dread of the winged and human-headed bulls guarding the entrance to the royal palace as do some of the Arab workmen who, in our own day, assist excavators to rescue them from sandy mounds in which they have been hidden for long centuries. When an idol was carried away from a city by an invading army, it was believed that the god himself had been taken prisoner and was therefore unable any longer to help his people. In the early stages of Sumerian culture, the gods and goddesses who formed groups were indistinguishable from demons. They were vaguely defined and had changing shapes. When attempts were made to depict them, they were represented in many varying forms. Some were winged bulls or lions with human heads. Others had even more remarkable composite forms. The Dragon of Babylon, for instance, which was portrayed on walls of temples, had a serpent's head, a body covered with scales, the four legs of a lion, hind legs of an eagle, and a long wriggling serpentine tail. He had several monster forms. The following description of one of these is repulsive enough. The head is the head of a serpent. From his nostrils mucus trickles. His mouth is beslavered with water. The ears are like those of a basilisk. His horns are twisted into 3 curls. He wears a veil in his headband. The body is a suffish full of stars. The base of his feet are claws. The sole of his foot has no heel. His name is Sushuwano, a sea monster, a form of E. Even after the gods were given beneficent attributes to reflect the growth of culture and were humanized, they still retained many of their savage characteristics. Bel-Enlil and his fierce son Nergal were destroyers of mankind. The storm god desolated the land. The sky god deluged it with rain. The sea raged furiously, ever hungering for human victims. The burning sun struck down its victims, and the floods played havoc with the dikes and houses of human beings. In Egypt, the sun god Ra was similarly a producer of calamity. The composite monster god Sokar was the lord of fear. Osiris in prehistoric times had been a dangerous god, and some of the pharaohs sought protection against him in the charms inscribed in their tombs. The Indian Shiva, the destroyer, in the old religious poems, has also primitive attributes of like character. The Sumerian gods never lost their connection with the early spirit groups. These continue to be represented by their attendants, who executed a deity's stern and vengeful decrees. In one of the Babylonian charms, the demons are referred to as the spleen of the gods, the symbols of their wrathful emotions and vengeful desires. Bel Enlil, the air and earth god, were served by the demons of disease, the beloved sons of Bel, which issued from the underworld to attack mankind. Nergal, the sulky and ill-tempered lord of death and destruction, who never lost his demoniac character, swept over the land, followed by the spirits of pestilence, sunstroke, weariness, and destruction. Anu, the sky god, had spawned at creation the demons of cold and rain and darkness. Even E and his consort, Damkina, were served by groups of devils and giants, which preyed upon mankind in bleak and desolate places when night fell. In the ocean home of E were bred the 7 evil spirits of Tempest, the gaping dragon, the leopard which preyed upon children, the great beast, the terrible serpent and sea. In Indian mythology, Indra was similarly followed by the stormy Maruts and fierce Rudra by the tempestuous Rudras. In Teutonic mythology, Odin is the wild huntsman in the raging host. In Greek mythology, the ocean furies attend upon fickle Poseidon. Other examples of this kind could be multiplied. As we have seen, Chapter II, the earliest group of Babylonian deities, consisted probably of 4 pairs of gods and goddesses as in Egypt. The first pair was Apsu-Rishtu and Tiamat, who personified the primordial deep. Now the elder deities in most mythologies, the grandsires and grandmothers and fathers and mothers, are ever the most powerful and most vengeful. They appear to represent primitive layers of savage thought. The Greek Kronos devours even his own children, and, as the late Andrew Lang has shown, there are many parallels to this myth among primitive peoples in various parts of the world. Lang regarded the Greek survival as an example of the conservatism of the religious instinct. The grandmother of the Teutonic deity Tyr was a fierce giantess with 900 heads. His father was an enemy of the gods. In Scotland, the hag-mother of winter and storm and darkness is the enemy of growth and all life, and she raises storms to stop the grass growing, to slay young animals, and prevent the union of her son with his fair bride. Similarly, the Babylonian chaos spirits, Apsu and Tiamat, the father and mother of the gods, resolve to destroy their offspring because they begin to set the universe in order. Tiamat, the female dragon, is more powerful than her husband Apsu, who is slain by his son E. She summons to her aid the gods of evil and creates also a brood of monster serpents, dragons, vipers, fishmen, raging hounds, and see so as to bring about universal and enduring confusion and evil. Not until she is destroyed can the beneficent gods establish law and order and make the earth habitable and beautiful. But although Tiamat was slain, the everlasting battle between the forces of good and evil was ever waged in the Babylonian world. Certain evil spirits were let loose at certain periods, and they strove to accomplish the destruction of mankind and his works. These invisible enemies were either charmed away by performing magical ceremonies or by invoking the gods to thwart them and bind them. Other spirits inhabited the bodies of animals and were ever hovering near. The ghosts of the dead and male and female demons were birds, like the birds of fate which sang to Siegfried. When the owl raised its melancholy voice in the darkness, the listener heard the spirit of a departed mother crying for her child. Ghosts and evil spirits wandered through the streets in darkness. They haunted empty houses. They fluttered through the evening air as bats. They hastened, moaning dismally, across barren wastes searching for food or lay in wait for travelers. They came as roaring lions and howling jackals, hungering for human flesh. The Shedu was a destructive bull which might slay man wantonly or as a protector of temples. Of like character was the Lamashu, depicted as a winged bull with human head, the protector of palaces. The Alu was a bull-like demon of tempest, and there were also many composite, distorted, or formless monsters which were vaguely termed seizers or overthrowers, the Semitic Labashu and Achezu, the Sumerian Dimya and Dimkur. A dialectic form of Galu or devil was Mulla. Professor Pinches thinks it not improbable that Mulla may be connected with the word Mulla, meaning star, and suggests that it referred to a will-o'-the-wisp. In these islands, according to an old rhyme, some call him Robin Goodfellow, Hobgoblin, or Mad Crisp, and some again do term him oft by name of Will-the-Wisp. Other names are Kitty, Peg, and Jack with a lantern, poor Robin sang. I should indeed as soon expect that Peg a lantern would direct me straightway home on misty night, as wandering stars quite out of sight. In Shakespeare's Tempest a sailor exclaims, your fairy, which you say is a harmless fairy, has done little better than played the jack with us. Dr. Johnson commented that the reference was to Jack with a lantern. Milton wrote also of the wandering fire, which oft, they say, some evil spirit attends, hovering and blazing with delusive light, misleads amazed night wanderer from his way, to bogs and mires, and oft through pond or pool, they're swallowed up and lost from succour far. When we stick in the mire, sang Drayton, he doth with laughter leave us. These fires were also fallen stars, death fires and fire drakes. So have I seen a fire drake glide along before a dying man to point his grave, and in it stick and hide. Pliny referred to the wandering lights as stars. The Sumerian Mulla was undoubtedly an evil spirit. In some countries the fire drake is a bird with gleaming breast. In Babylonia it assumed the form of a bull, and may have had some connection with the bull of Lshtar. Like the Indian Dasu and Dasa, Galu was applied in the sense of foreign devil to human and superhuman adversaries of certain monarchs. Some of the supernatural beings resemble our elves and fairies and the Indian Rakshasas. Occasionally they appear in comely human guise, at other times they are vaguely monstrous. The best known of this class is Lilith, who, according to Hebrew tradition, preserved in the Talmud, was the demon lover of Adam. She has been immortalized by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Of Adam's first wife Lilith, it is told, the which he loved before the gift of Eve, that ere the snakes her sweet tongue could deceive, and her enchanted hair was the first gold. And still she sits, young while the earth is old, and subtly of herself contemplative, draws men to watch the bright web she can weave, till heart and body and life are in its hold. The rose and poppy are her flowers, for where is he not found, O Lilith, whom shed scent, and soft shed kisses, and soft sleep shall snare? Lo, as that youth's eyes burned at thine, so went thy spell through him, and left his straight neck bent, and round his heart one strangling golden hair. Lilith is the Babylonian Lilithu, a feminine form of Lilu, the Sumerian Lila. She resembles Sapanaka of the Ramayana, who made love to Rama and Lakshmana, and the sister of the demon Hidimva, who became enamored of Bhima, one of the heroes of the Mahabharata, and the various fairy lovers of Europe, who lured men to eternal imprisonment inside mountains, or vanished forever when they were completely under their influence, leaving them demented. The elfin Lilu similarly wooed young women, like the Germanic Lauren of the wonderful Rose Garden, who carried away the fair lady Cunhild to his underground dwelling amidst the Tyrolese mountains, or left them haunting the place of their meetings, searching for him in vain. A savage place, as holy and enchanted as air beneath the waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. His flashing eyes, his floating hair, weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread. For he on honey dew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise. Another materializing spirit of this class was Ardat Lily, who appears to have wedded human beings like the swan maidens, the mermaids, and nereids of the European folk tales, and the goddess Ganga, who for a time was the wife of King Shantanu of the Mahabharata. The Labatu, to whom we have referred, was a female who haunted mountains and marshes. Like the fairies and hags of Europe, she stole or afflicted children, who accordingly had to wear charms round their necks for protection. 7 of these supernatural beings were reputed to be daughters of Anu, the sky god. The Alu, a storm deity, was also a spirit which caused nightmare. It endeavored to smother sleepers like the Scandinavian hag Mara, and similarly deprived them of power to move. In Babylonia, this evil spirit might also cause sleeplessness or death by hovering near a bed. In shape, it might be as horrible and repulsive as the Egyptian ghosts, which caused children to die from fright or by sucking out the breath of life. As most representatives of the spirit world were enemies of the living, so were the ghosts of dead men and women. Death chilled all human affections. It turned love to hate. The deeper the love had been, the deeper became the enmity fostered by the ghost. Certain ghosts might also be regarded as particularly virulent and hostile if they happened to have left the body of one who was ceremonially impure. The most terrible ghost in Babylonia was that of a woman who had died in childbed. She was pitied and dreaded. Her grief had demented her. She was doomed to wail in the darkness. Her impurity clung to her like poison. No spirit was more prone to work evil against mankind, and her hostility was accompanied by the most tragic sorrow. In northern India, the Hindus, like the ancient Babylonians, regard as a fearsome demon the ghost of a woman who died while pregnant or on the day of the child's birth. A similar belief prevailed in Mexico. In Europe, there are many folk tales of dead mothers who return to avenge themselves on the cruel fathers of neglected children. A sharp contrast is presented by the Mongolian Buryats, whose outlook on the spirit world is less gloomy than was that of the ancient Babylonians. According to Mr. Jeremiah Curtin, this interesting people are wont to perform a ceremony with purpose to entice the ghost to return to the dead body, a proceeding which is dreaded in the Scottish Highlands. The Buryats address the ghost, saying, "You shall sleep well. Come back to your natural ashes. Take pity on your friends." It is necessary to live a real life. Do not wander along the mountains. Do not be like bad spirits. Return to your peaceful home. Come back and work for your children. How can you leave the little ones? If it is a mother, these words have great effect. Sometimes the spirit moans and sobs, and the Buryats tell that there have been instances of it returning to the body. In his Arabia Deserta, Doughty relates that Arab women and children mock the cries of the owl. One explained to him, "It is a wailful woman seeking her lost child. She has become this forlorn bird." So do immemorial beliefs survive to our own day. The Babylonian ghosts of unmarried men and women, and of those without offspring, were also disconsolate night wanderers. Others who suffered similar fates were the ghosts of men who died in battle far from home and were left unburied, the ghosts of travelers who perished in the desert and were not covered over, the ghosts of drowned men which rose from the water, the ghosts of prisoners starved to death or executed, the ghosts of people who died violent deaths before their appointed time. The dead required to be cared for, to have libations poured out, to be fed, so that they might not prowl through the streets or enter houses searching for scraps of food and pure water. The duty of giving offerings to the dead was imposed apparently on near relatives. As in India, it would appear that the eldest son performed the funeral ceremony. A dreadful fate, therefore, awaited the spirit of the dead Babylonian man or woman without offspring. In Sanskrit literature, there is a reference to a priest who was not allowed to enter paradise, although he had performed rigid penances because he had no children. There were hags and giants of mountain and desert, of river and ocean. Demons might possess the pig, the goat, the horse, the lion or the ibis, the raven or the hawk. The seven spirits of tempest, fire, and destruction rose from the depths of ocean, and there were hosts of demons which could not be overcome or baffled by man without the assistance of the gods to whom they were hostile. Many were sexless, having no offspring. They were devoid of mercy and compassion. They penetrated everywhere. The high enclosures, the broad enclosures like a flood. They pass through. From house to house they dash along. No door can shut them out. No bolt can turn them back. Through the door, like a snake, they glide. Through the hinge, like the wind, they storm, tearing the wife from the embrace of the man, driving the freedman from his family home. These furies did not confine their unwelcomed attentions to mankind alone. They hunt the doves from their cotes, and drive the birds from their nests, and chase the marten from its hole. Through the gloomy street by night they roam, smiting sheepfold and cattle pen, shutting up the land as with door and bolt. The Babylonian poet, like Burns, was filled with pity for the animals which suffered in the storm. Listening the doors and winnocks rattle, I thought me, oh, the Ararai cattle, or silly sheep, wha bide this brattle? O winter war, ilk-happing bird, wee helpless thing, that in the merry months, O spring, delighted me to hear thee sing. What comes o' thee? Why wilt thou cower thy chittering wing, and close thy ear? According to Babylonian belief, the great storms directed from heaven were caused by demons. Mankind heard them loudly roaring above, gibbering below. The south wind was raised by Shutu, a plumed storm demon resembling Hrísvelga of the Icelandic Eddas. Corpse Swallower sits at the end of heaven, a Jötun in eagle form. From his wings, they say, comes the wind which fares over all the dwellers of earth. The northern story of Thor's fishing, when he hooked and wounded the Midgard serpent, is recalled by the Babylonian legend of Adapa, son of the god E. This hero was engaged catching fish when Shutu the south wind upset his boat. In his wrath, Adapa immediately attacked the storm demon and shattered her pinions. Anu, the sky god, was moved to anger against E's son and summoned him to the celestial court. Adapa, however, appeared in garments of mourning and was forgiven. Anu offered him the water of life and the bread of life, which would have made him immortal, but E's son refused to eat or drink, believing, as his father had warned him, that the sky god desired him to partake of the bread of death and to drink of the water of death. Another terrible atmospheric demon was the southwest wind, which caused destructive storms and floods, and claimed many human victims like the Icelandic corpse swallower. She was depicted with lidless staring eyes, broad flat nose, mouth gaping horribly and showing tusk-like teeth, and with high cheekbones, heavy eyebrows, and low bulging forehead. In Scotland, the Hag of the Southwest Wind is similarly a bloodthirsty and fearsome demon. She is most virulent in the springtime. At Cromarty she is quaintly called Gentle Annie by the fisher folks, who repeat the saying, "When Gentle Annie is skyolan yelling round the heel of Ness, a promontory, why a white feather on her hat, the foam of big billows, they the spirits will be harrying robbing the crook, that is, the pot which hangs from the crook is empty during the spring storms, which prevent fishermen going to sea." In England the wind hag is Black Annie's, who dwells in a Leicestershire hill cave. She may be identical with the Irish hag Anu, associated with the Paps of Anu. According to Gaelic lore, this wind demon of spring is the Cailleach, old wife. She gives her name in the Highland calendar to the stormy period of late spring. She raises gale after gale to prevent the coming of summer. Angerboda, the Icelandic hag, is also a storm demon, but represents the east wind. A Tyrolese folk tale tells of 3 magic maidens who dwelt on Jochgrim Mountain, where they brewed the winds. Their demon lovers were Ek, he who causes fear, Vasalt, he who causes dismay, and the scornful Dietrich in his mythical character of Donar or Thunna, Thor, the Thunderer. Another Sumerian storm demon was the Zu bird, which is represented among the stars by Pegasus and Taurus. A legend relates that this worker of evil, who raised the head of evil, once aspired to rule the gods and stole from Bel, the lord of deities, the tablets of destiny, which gave him his power over the universe as controller of the fates of all. The Zu bird escaped with the tablets and found shelter on its mountain top in Arabia. Anu called on Raman, the thunderer, to attack the Zu bird, but he was afraid. Other gods appear to have shrunk from the conflict. How the rebel was overcome is not certain, because the legend survives in fragmentary form. There is a reference, however, to the moon god setting out towards the mountain in Arabia with purpose to outwit the Zu bird and recover the lost tablets. How he fared it is impossible to ascertain. In another legend, that of Etana the mother serpent, addressing the sun god, Shamus says, "Thy net is like unto the broad earth. Thy snare is like unto the distant heaven. Who hath ever escaped from thy net? Even Zu, the worker of evil, who raised the head of evil, did not escape." In Indian mythology, Garuda, half-giant, half-eagle, robs the Amrita, ambrosia of the gods, which gives them their power and renders them immortal. It had assumed a golden body, bright as the sun. Indra, the thunderer, flung his bolt in vain. He could not wound Garuda and only displaced a single feather. Afterwards, however, he stole the moon goblet containing the Amrita, which Garuda had delivered to his enemies, the serpents, to free his mother from bondage. This Indian eagle giant became the vehicle of the god Vishnu, and according to the Mahabharata, mocked the wind with his fleetness. It would appear that the Babylonian zoo bird symbolized the summer sandstorms from the Arabian desert. Thunder is associated with the rainy season, and it may have been assumed, therefore, that the thunder god was powerless against the sandstorm demon, who was chased, however, by the moon, and finally overcome by the triumphant sun when it broke through the darkening sand drift and brightened heaven and earth. Netting, the rebellious demon who desired to establish the rule of evil over gods and mankind. In the legend of Etana, the eagle, another demon which links with the Indian Garuda, slayer of serpents, devours the brood of the mother serpent. For this offense against divine law, Shamash, the sun god, pronounces the eagle's doom. He instructs the mother serpent to slay a wild ox and conceal herself in its entrails. The eagle comes to feed on the carcass, unheeding the warning of one of his children, who says, "The serpent lies in this wild ox." He swooped down and stood upon the wild ox. The eagle examined the flesh. He looked about carefully before and behind him. He again examined the flesh. He looked about carefully before and behind him. Then, moving swiftly, he made for the hidden parts. When he entered into the midst, the serpent seized him by his wing. In vain the eagle appealed for mercy to the mother serpent, who was compelled to execute the decree of Shamash. She tore off the eagle's pinions, wings, and claws, and threw him into a pit where he perished from hunger and thirst. This myth may refer to the ravages of a winged demon of disease who was thwarted by the sacrifice of an ox. The mother serpent appears to be identical with an ancient goddess of maternity resembling the Egyptian Bast, the serpent mother of Bubastes. According to Sumerian belief, Nintu, a form of the goddess Ma, was half a serpent. On her head there is a horn, she is girt about the loins, her left arm holds a babe suckling her breast. From her head to her loins, the body is that of a naked woman. From the loins to the sole of the foot, scales like those of a snake are visible. The close association of gods and demons is illustrated in an obscure myth, which may refer to an eclipse of the moon or a night storm at the beginning of the rainy season. The demons go to war against the high gods and are assisted by Adad, Raman, the thunderer, Shamash the sun, and Ishtar. They desire to wreck the heavens, the home of Anu. They clustered angrily round the crescent of the moon god, and won over to their aid Shamash, the mighty, and Adad, the warrior, and Ishtar, who with Anu, the king, hath founded a shining dwelling. The moon god Sin, the seed of mankind, was darkened by the demons who raged, rushing loose over the land like to the wind. Bel called upon his messenger, whom he sent to E in the ocean depths, saying, "My son Sin hath been grievously bedimmed." E lamented, and dispatched his son Merodach to net the demons by magic, using a two-colored cord from the hair of a virgin kid and from the wool of a virgin lamb. As in India, where Shitala, the Bengali goddess of smallpox, for instance, is worshipped when the dreaded disease she controls becomes epidemic, so in Babylonia the people sought to secure immunity from attack by worshipping spirits of disease. A tablet relates that Ura, a plague demon, once resolved to destroy all life, but ultimately consented to spare those who praised his name and exalted him in recognition of his bravery and power. This could be accomplished by reciting a formula. Indian serpent worshippers believe that their devotions destroy all danger proceeding from snakes. Like the ancient Egyptians, The Babylonians also had their kindly spirits who brought luck and the various enjoyments of life. A good Labartu might attend on a human being like a household fairy of India or Europe. A friendly Shedu could protect a household against the attacks of fierce demons and human enemies. Even the spirits of fate who served Anu, god of the sky, and that Norn of the underworld, Ereshkigal, queen of Hades, might sometimes be propitious. If the deities were successfully invoked, they could cause the fates to smite spirits of disease and bringers of ill luck. Damu, a friendly fairy goddess, was well loved, because she inspired pleasant dreams, relieved the sufferings of the afflicted, and restored to good health those patients whom she selected to favor. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the kindly spirits are overshadowed by the evil ones, because the various magical spells which were put on record were directed against those supernatural beings who were enemies of mankind. Similarly, in Babylonia, the fragments of this class of literature which survive deal mainly with wicked and vengeful demons. It appears probable, however, that the highly emotional Sumerians and Akkadians were on occasion quite as cheerful a people as the inhabitants of ancient Egypt. Although they were surrounded by bloodthirsty furies who desired to shorten their days, and their nights were filled with vague lowering phantoms which inspired fear, they no doubt shared, in their charm-protected houses, a comfortable feeling of security after performing magical ceremonies, and were happy enough when they gathered round flickering lights to listen to ancient song and story and gossip about crops and traders, the members of the royal house, and the family affairs of their acquaintances. The Babylonian spirit world, it will be seen, was of complex character. Its inhabitants were numberless, but often vaguely defined, and one class of demons linked with another. Like the European fairies of folk belief, the Babylonian spirits were extremely hostile and irresistible at certain seasonal periods, and they were fickle and perverse and difficult to please even when inclined to be friendly. They were also similarly manifested from time to time in various forms. Sometimes they were comely and beautiful, at other times they were apparitions of horror. The jinn of present-day Arabians are of like character. These may be giants, cloudy shapes, comely women, serpents or cats, goats or pigs. Some of the composite monsters of Babylonia may suggest the vague and exaggerated recollections of terror-stricken people who have had glimpses of unfamiliar wild beasts in the dusk or amidst reedy marshes. But they cannot be wholly accounted for in this way. While animals were often identified with supernatural beings, and foreigners were called devils, it would be misleading to assert that the spirit world reflects confused folk memories of human and bestial enemies. Even when a demon was given concrete human form, it remained essentially non-human. No ordinary weapon could inflict an injury, and it was never controlled by natural laws. The spirits of disease and tempest and darkness were creations of fancy. They symbolized moods. They were the causes which explained effects. A sculptor or storyteller who desired to convey an impression of a spirit of storm or pestilence created monstrous forms to inspire terror. Sudden and unexpected visits of fierce and devastating demons were accounted for by asserting that they had wings like eagles, were nimble-footed as gazelles, cunning and watchful as serpents, that they had claws to clutch, horns to gore, and powerful forelegs like a lion to smite down victims. Withal, they drank blood like ravens and devoured corpses like hyenas. Monsters were all the more repulsive when they were partly human. The human-headed snake, or the snake-headed man, and the man with the horns of a wild bull and the legs of a goat were horrible in the extreme. Evil spirits might sometimes achieve success by practicing deception. They might appear as beautiful girls or handsome men and seize unsuspecting victims in deathly embrace, or leave them demented and full of grief, or come as birds and suddenly assume awesome shapes. Fairies and elves and other half-human demons are sometimes regarded as degenerate gods. It will be seen, however, that while certain spirits developed into deities, others remain something between these two classes of supernatural beings. They might attend upon gods and goddesses, or operate independently, now against mankind and now against deities even. The Namtaru, for instance, was a spirit of fate, the son of Bel-Enlil and Ereshkigal, queen of Hades. Apparently, writes Professor Pinches, he executed the instructions given him concerning the fate of men, and could also have power over certain of the gods. To this middle class belong the evil gods who rebelled against the beneficent deities. According to Hebridean folk belief, the fallen angels are divided into three classes: the fairies, the nimble men, Aurora Borealis, and the blue men of the Minch. In Beowulf, the brood of Cain includes monsters and elves and sea devils, giants also, who long time fought with God, for which he gave them their reward. Similarly, the Babylonian spirit groups are liable to division and subdivision. The various classes may be regarded as relics of the various stages of development, from crude animism to sublime monotheism. In the fragmentary legends, we trace the floating material from which great mythologies have been framed.